any specific dose coefficient factor at the moment. We are fully aware about the changes, and it is up to member states to choose the proper dose conversion factor and apply. Even though there is not an official position of the IAEA, with my own experience and engagement with the member states, those conversion factors of ICRP 137 part 3 for radon has already been implemented in many countries. It was very quick implementation, but there is a problem. It is not a number to introducing a new dose coefficient factors and let the arrangement is done with number of non-industrial facilities or radon-prone activities. There are a number of issues, and a technical guidance is needed. Now we are observing that regulators, without changing their legislation, introducing some technical guidance. There are a couple of available documentation, like in Australia and in Europe, a couple of member states already introduced them in connection with the radon action plan. Previous radon action plan was mainly for the dwellings. Now, majority of the member states, including workplaces, in the radon action plan, and those coefficients are there. However, use of those coefficient factor and to make those estimation has lots of difficulties. The speakers before me were talking about uncertainties, number of assumptions are needing, attached, unattached fraction, breathing rates, sedentary workers. There are a number of issues, and the guidance with the member states are not properly addresses this. That's why we are offering technical expertise for the development of the regulatory guidance for measurement, control, and dose estimate. The second thing, the technical service providers. In GSR Part 3, technical service providers need to be approved or authorized by the regulatory body, mostly individual monitoring services, environmental monitoring services, and calibration services. Now, there are many radon measurement and dose assessment companies, technical services. They need to be approved and authorized by the regulatory body. There is a heavy reliance on the ISO 17025 laboratory accreditation, which means nothing. It is a good indicator, and it is also recommended by the IAEA. Laboratory accreditation is not a requirement. It is a recommendation in GST 7. It says the third-party recognition is encouraged, but in some member states, laboratory accreditation is enough to be authorized and approved by the regulatory body. This requires some sort of arrangements with the measurement technique, dose assessment methodology, and everything. The third point, which is so important for us, the national dose registries. The national dose registries are developing. I'm sorry, I'm having a call right now. I'm sure Rask is calling me. Sorry for this. The NDRs are developing. This is mainly for the artificial sources of radiation, but the natural sources of radiation are included for the workers exposed to radon and the others. Some sort of guidance, again, is needed in this regard. I will pass the floor to you. If maybe in the second round I can give more information. In the meantime, I need to answer the phone call.
Thank you, Burçin. Thank you very much for your comments and you know, actually bringing up and opening some more information or issues related to regulatory authorities or regulatory bodies, actually, and then the perspective of IAEA, discussion on the dosimetry services, and actually the capacity available for quite demanding task to cover all the workplaces identified within the individual EU member states or other countries. So then, thank you very much. Then we can continue, actually, since we have quite interesting presentation already and opening some issues regarding measurement, and there were some discussions. Of course, we can prolong a bit more if we have enough time. But
thank you very much.
Thank you. And then we can start with the, let's say, information on the, the point which is important from a regulatory perspective, since this is the major part and there are many activities dealing with them. So most of us are from research institutions, public health institutions, or technical support organizations supporting our regulators, universities, and doing research in science, which is the basis and evidence for the further steps and the regulation. But the real work then with the responsibility is on the regulatory bodies, and then I would start with one member from Public Health Regulatory Authority, regional one in Banská Bystrica in Slovakia. So Alžbeta Jurecová, floor is yours.
Thank you for invitation. Aleš, you are right that the regulatory body have very hard work, and we have to start somewhere. So what regulator need? Regulator needs to have a good legislation, then need to know where to go for the inspection. So we started with the, for example, in my country, we started with the implementation of the European Commission or European Union directive. We implemented it in 2018, so it was the first step, and then we added in 2018, you know that ICRP 137 recommendation was introduced, and we had a very long discussion how to use these dose conversion factor, whether implemented it in our legislation or not. So finally, we decided that we have to do it, that we have to follow ICRP 137 recommendation. And we adopted this dose conversion coefficient, and we have a new decree, and this new decree dedicated to the norm and radon workplaces will be enforced from the 1st July of this year. And what we implemented from the ICRP 137, we implemented the simplified dose conversion coefficient. It means that we implemented this 3 millisievert per millijoule hour and cubic meter for workplaces that are situated in the buildings and in the mines, and 6 millisievert per millijoule an hour and cubic meter for the workplaces that are situated not situated underground, but only tourist case. We decided that we will apply those coefficients only for the tourist case. So from regulatory body, we started with what is important for the regulator to apply the graded approach. So we need to know inventory of our workplaces. What we else need? We need the measurement protocol. Again, another challenging part for regulator, because we have to take into account the spatial and temporal variation of the radioactivity concentration and also the attached and unattached fraction when it is important. So we have this, and in our case, we implemented the ISO standard 11665 series, just to simplify our work. And also when we are talking about the equilibrium factor, again, we implemented that we will take into account equilibrium factor 0.4 for workplaces that are situated in buildings and underground, but only that one that they don't have a forced ventilation. In that cases, when the workplace is situated in underground has the forced ventilation, equilibrium factors we take into account 0.4. So we have a lot of challenging in our work. So I hope that we find the best way I don't want to prolong discussion because we have not a lot of time. So thank you for your attention at this time.
Thank you, Elżbieta. It's very important to see and listen to the regulators' needs, and there are challenges, you know, such as the identification of workplaces, you know, delineation of the high radon priority areas, radon prone areas, and then classification of categorization of workplaces and many things like that, based on the, you know, prognostic approaches or projections, and there are, you know, a lot of underlying uncertainties, such as we have already discussed in case of measurement, underlying uncertainties regarding the modeling and the parameters assessment, and also epidemiological studies, which was the, you know, first formulate step for risk assessment and those conversion coefficient, those conversion factors assessment. Now I would like to ask Werner Rimm, from Federal Office for Radiation Protection, BFS in Germany, and also, you know, a current chair of the ICRP. Werner, floor is yours.
Yes, Aleš, thank you very much. Yes, I will give now some comments from the perspective of ICRP. Also, I was not involved in developing the OIR series, and especially I was not involved in the dose conversion coefficients for radon. Now, let me start with two positive observations. The first positive observation relates actually to the epidemiological background, which you just mentioned, Aleš, which was not a topic here. And this is good news because in recent years, this was already a heavy debate between those conversion coefficients proposed by ANSCE and those proposed by ICRP. And my take is that the fact that it's that it was not discussed here is that it's now a bit clearer than before. And to me, the PUMA study, there was a workshop last year at BFS discussing the pooled uranium miner analyses, seemed to me that this controversial issue was somehow solved and settled. So this is the first good news. The second good news I would like to highlight is one, before we come to the dose conversion coefficients, that you understand that the current series of ICRP, the 5 publications on occupational intake of radionuclides, they provide values. It's the best what we ever had so far. And it was a huge effort to produce those conversion coefficients. This has to do with, there were several changes in ICRP 103, as you know, and afterwards. So the new dose conversion coefficients, they include the new radioactive decay data proposed by ICRP after 103, the new reference phantoms, for example, new or revised biokinetic models. So there is many changes in the weighting factors, as you know, as effective dose is calculated since 103, as proposed in 103. So there were a lot of changes, and all those changes improved the final outcome, the dose conversion coefficients. And finally, many hundreds of radioisotopes have been calculated, provide dose conversion coefficients for different ingestion pathways, incorporation pathways, as you all know. So this was a huge effort, and it's the best what we ever had. This is, to me at least, and this is my ICRP perspective, of course, this is the second good news. Now, so to me, it seems that the discussion which started a couple of years ago on the epidemiological science behind has now focused more on how to implement the dose conversion coefficients. And we just heard from Sebastian Feige that there are issues which make it a bit difficult for those who are now in charge to implement new values. And these have to be discussed, of course. But in those discussions, I think we should never forget, and this was also already mentioned by Aleš a couple of minutes ago, and it was also demonstrated by the previous by the previous presentations today, that it's an extremely complicated issue to calculate radiation doses to humans from radon exposure and progeny exposure. You are the experts, you know that much better than I do. So the uncertainties behind are huge. And we heard that at different workplaces, there are so many parameters that might influence this particle size distribution and the attached fraction and all these things. So it's really complicated. I think we should not think that we can provide those estimates in a very accurate way, and giving DCCs with 2 dots after the 2 digits after the dot, what I saw today, I think it gives a wrong impression. So the uncertainties are huge. And finally, and this is in the end very important, and Alesh mentioned that, in the end, we are not in the way, it's not our topic to estimate individual risks from radon exposure. I mean, we are far from being able to do that, even if we could measure perfectly well all the parameters. So the individual risk behind is not what we are interested in here. And we should always keep this in mind. We have to find a practical solution to improve radiation protection. And this inevitably requires simplifications. And I understand that we could calculate or measure at different workplaces. We could think about different physical activities and exchanging workplaces after half a day and those things. Of course, there are so many issues which influence the final value of a dose from an inhalation of radon in a radon environment. But we really should keep in mind that the uncertainties are huge. We are not interested in individual risk estimates. We are interested in a practical implementation to improve the overall radiation protection approaches from radon. Thank you.
Thank you, Werner. That was clear summary from perspective of ICRP and broad perspective and challenges for regulators, actually. Then, since we have time limited, we proceed to next speaker, Dr. Arturo Vargas, which is actually chairperson of Working Group 3 of EURADOS. Arturo, floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation to this panel, and I think also the presentation during this morning was really interesting, and also the intervention of the panelists here, because we really touch the problems that, or the issues that we have with this implementation of ICRP dose coefficient, which is, as Werner said, this is the most thing that we know about that, and we can apply. We also learn, or we also know that to apply these conversion coefficients is not an easy way. Yes, and for the regulatory bodies, I mean, it should be something more clear in this way, because they have to apply laws and they have maybe consequences, and also economical consequences on this application. So from this point of view, that we have the best thing, ICRP 137 dose coefficient, we have to apply it in some best way. We think, or I think, that it should be somehow harmonized how we apply it. So from this point of view, now in EURADOS, we decided to create the radon group, subgroup in Working Group 3, where I am the chair there. And at this time, it was the coordinator of EURADOS was Werner. And we created, to remember, the radon group now. And in fact, we realized this situation of the dose conversion coefficients, and we create a subgroup there, of the radon group, which is devoted to this dose conversion coefficients. And what we like to do there, the first thing that we are working on that, and we like to be a platform to discussion about this. is just to make some exercises to compare how different authorities, different groups calculated the tolls or apply the ICRP 137 conversion coefficient or what they have in their own legislation. And we saw a lot of different results on that, which somehow I think we should discuss, we should harmonize. In fact, the chair of this subgroup of those conversion factors coefficients is Sebastian Feig, which is in the discussions there. And so we continue with this kind of exercises. So really, you are invited to participate in these exercises. You are invited to participate in the Euratos group. I think it's a good platform. We have a really nice discussions there. And we also like to go in the other topic, which is also the metrology, just how, what we measure and what kind of conversion coefficient we will have, different system to measure it. It was pointed out by people, by the guy from the agency, yes, Burian, I think it was the name. And so this is what we can offer from Euratos. Yes, we like to be a platform in order to discuss, in order to improve and to be harmonized in the use of this coefficient that I'm sure we have to apply the ICRP system. Yes. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Arturo. Yeah, that was a clear message and about the harmonization of the approaches. And also, it is important always to have the clear procedure and information how the dose is estimated actually in particular case, to be clear and to have a chance to compare what was the inputs and rationale behind her, and to have all this information available. Now we can proceed to the last panelist, last not least, but not least actually, and that's on purpose actually, since Dr. Francesco Bocchicchio is the member of group of experts are referred to in Article 31, Euratom Treaty, and of course the head of or chair of the electronic working group on the implementation or practical implementation of new dose or radon dose coefficients. So Francesco, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I try to be as quick as possible, and so taking account what has been already said, and try to go a little bit further. First of all, let me to remember what Helena Jankovic said very clearly at the first presentation of yesterday. So the approach of a radiation protection, for example, as modeled by the European Basic Safety Standard on radon in workplaces, is based largely on the measurements of radon concentration, and only in relatively few cases we will need, following the directive and following the transposition of the directive, we will need to evaluate the dose. So we have to always to keep in mind that this is it is not the issue of the radon protection in workplaces. Is one of the issues. It is not the largest one in terms of radiation protection. We have to remind that there are that effective dose is a tool for radiation protection. It is not the single tool, is not the objective. The objective is not to evaluate the dose of every person in the world. The objective is to reduce the exposure in order to optimize the exposure of both workers and population. So this is the first point. Another point is that so moving to the dose coefficient issues, we have to consider that from the basic safety standard point of view, and from the European European Commission point of view, the situation is clear. It is decided to adopt the ICRP those coefficients with all the uncertainty that has been mentioned today, but I don't want to mention more. And the issue is now how to implement. How to implement is an issue. It's simple, let me say, a simple consequence of the fact that the dose coefficients have been increased. But those coefficients has been increased because mainly as a consequence of the fact that many years ago, the epidemiological studies clearly says that the risk due to radon is higher than it was evaluated previously. ICRP itself in 2009 gave a statement recognizing that the risk is more or less the double that was evaluated before. And this is on the basis of what we are discussing today, including the dose coefficients. Then for those coefficients, there are more technicality, of course, and this is also the result of the decision of ICRP to come back to a poor dosimetric approach for radon, compared with a previous approach, which was based more on epidemiologic studies. But okay, this is just to remind the framework on which we are talking about. The last few words that I would like to say now is that the very preliminary outcome of the activity that I'm chairing for the group of experts, Article 31, that was mentioned by Aleš in my candid presentation, this presentation of me, is that, of course, many member states found difficulties in applying those coefficients that gave general 2 times or 4 times more than previously those value compare for the same levels of exposure. So this clearly produced some problems. And but the good news is that in most, although not all of the cases, but in most of the cases, these difficulties seems to be already overcome. This doesn't mean that all the difficulties has been overcome. Of course, it depends on the specific situation. But in general, of course, we have to try to reduce the radon in most of the situations in which we can reduce radon. Whereas where we cannot reduce the radon levels, the radon concentration, we have to reduce the exposure just by reducing the time in which the workers are exposed to such a level. This is a general difficulties that we have to deal with. But I think, again, I think it is a good news that we are it seems that we are solving more of the problems. This doesn't mean that all the problems have been already solved. The discussion will continue, both on the sides of the implementation and solving the difficulties, and from scientific point of view, also on the sides of what is the best evaluation of a dose. Again, without forgetting the meaning of effective dose. And finally, of course, I fully agree with both Werner, Aleš, and others underline that the issue of dose calculations is completely different on the perfect evaluation of individual risk, which include many more elements that are not included in the dose calculation itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesco, and thank you also for emphasizing the dose calculations or dose assessment as one of the tools for the exposure management, and there are many, of course. we use usually proxies or surrogates such as the activity radon concentration. And we have seen today that in some specific cases, such as caves and special underground workplaces, it's not enough to measure only the radon concentration, or it's not sufficient. So we can, of course, provide some more accurate and measurement and other quantity of interest to be more precise in those assessment, of course. But I would say we are on the good road forward, and since we can compare the radiation protection effort back to the history, starting with the radiation protection of underground miners, uranium miners, and you know the risk assessment based on 3 measurements per several years, actually, only in that time available. And now we are discussing about the high sophisticated aerosols, attached, non-attached, and then, you know, very, very fine and tuned measurement techniques, of course. So they clear moving forward. Still, there are many underlying uncertainties I would have mentioned, of course. But in general, we need to find the high exposures to be reduced and to identify as many workplaces as possible and to regulate the exposures in there. So which is the major aim for regulators. So what does it mean? And that has been mentioned already. Dosimetry services available, standardization, standardized protocols and procedures, and also the companies providing the measurements of and those calculations. And what is important, and it's the last comment from my side, which is I'm representing work package 5 mitigation. So the aim is also mitigate and reduce the doses or reduce the exposures. And believe me, this is the big issue and challenge for all of the countries to have professionals dealing with mitigation in enough capacities to provide efficient mitigation service as needed, of course. And the last actually is that it's based on the regulators also, the decision on member states. There are, you know, of course, various other directives, not only EU BSS, but other, sometimes, you know, it in contradiction. I mean, the goals or should be harmonized in terms of, for instance, energy performance of buildings directive, energy efficiency directive, and the waste framework directive. Many of them needs to be harmonized, covered. Construction product directive, of course, coming soon, some revision. So then, thank you to all of you, all panelists, audience here, carefully listening all the time. That was quite long, and I apologize that, and thank you very much to all of you.